Collaborative Leaders Huddle. This is Craig Ross calling from the remote outreaches of Fort Worth, Texas, in a beautiful hotel room here. Excited to be back on the road. Excited to be with each of you. A special Collaborative Leaders Huddle today. I'm going to be introducing our distinguished guests. Our Collaborative Leaders Huddle, of course, sponsored by none other than Veris Global, where we believe organizations that are not aligned, that not only fail their customers, they fail their employees. So we at Veris Global, of course, rapidly align collaborative teams so you can succeed faster in more meaningful ways. This Collaborative Leaders Huddle, very special to us, of course, and so delighted that the responses from, frankly, around the world. In fact, we have 11 countries represented in our huddle this morning. Our friends to the north, Canada, our friends from the south, folks from Brazil, all the way over in Asia, a connector in China. Way to go, this is outstanding. Really excited about our time together. It's fast, it's unscripted, and it's to the point. And so really delighted again. Thank you everybody for joining us. I want to introduce our guests, of course, first, the support of Sherilyn Jane, the one and only, our moderator behind the scenes. I beg her to put her photo up because she deserves the credit, but she won't. Sherilyn, will you at least say good morning?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions for Lucy, Angie, Craig, you can either send them publicly and I'll call on you, or you can do it privately and I'll ask the question on your behalf.
Excellent. Thank you, Sherilyn. Appreciate that. And one who hardly needs an introduction at all, back for round two, and of course, counting on Angie's support as we move forward. But Dr. Angie Piccioni, not just the Executive Director of Higher Education for the state of Colorado, sits on the governor's cabinet, but a near and dear friend of Veris Global and so many of our client partners around the world, sits on our advisory board and does a lot of important work as it relates to bringing out the best in people. It's her credo, and she's a special, special human being. Angie, say good morning, please.
Good morning, everyone, and really happy to be here with my good friend, Lucy.
Yes. With that, Dr. Lucy Gilday, of course, the Senior Vice President, you can see it on your screen, Chief Scientific Officer for Global Cosmetics, the company called Mary Kay, a privately held company, and one fascinating company. I'm really excited for you to get access to Dr. Gilday because she is not only by position a person of authority, but she earns the right to influence her employees. She earns the right to touch the hearts of others around her. Angie and I know Lucy personally, and once you get a dose of Lucy, you're going to understand why she's so effective at what she does. You know, at Veris Global, we believe the best collaborative leaders are also outstanding human beings, and you're going to experience that here over the next 50 minutes. Lucy, will you say good morning to our huddle?
Good morning. Thank you, Craig. I'm blushing.
Yes. Well, it's all deserved. We're going to jump right in. As everybody knows, this is hard hitting and to the point. We want to find practical solutions to answering our big question: how do you empower employees in the new normal of business? Of course, no one knows what normal is anymore, but it's a new era for sure. And at Mary Kay, they take empowerment very, very seriously. We're going to touch on that during our conversation. But Lucy, let's begin with you. How would you answer our big question?
Well, I'd like to start with the perspective that whether it's the new normal or our former way of working, just recognizing that similar to success, empowerment is kind of self-defined, if you will. And so an important aspect is really being in touch with your employees and your teams to understand what motivates them and what empowers them, first and foremost.
You know, that's I appreciate you starting there, actually. This idea, and you actually inspired this some time ago for me, this idea that as a leader, instead of thinking of here's how I empower people, it's actually very personal. And you've talked about it with each person that you lead. It's a personal endeavor. Can you say more about that? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, empowerment's built on the principle of, you know, giving individuals the opportunity, the autonomy, the resources, and the motivation that they will in turn become more productive, happy, and ultimately engaged. So I think that's a common principle. But like I personally define success for myself in a balance of harmony professionally and personally, the people I work with each want something different when they think about empowerment. And so it really requires me being in touch and connected with them often.
Yeah, well put. Angie, I'm going to come to you with a follow-up question then based upon what Lucy shared. You and I, for years, we would ask leaders out in the field, if I've got 8 direct reports, to what extent do we know the individual motivations of each one of those 8? And is that top of mind as we interacting? What would you add then to Lucy's points there?
Yeah, and I would initially just say ditto, but you know that I love words and I love the origin of words. And when we think about empower, technically it means to put power in, but what that really looks like is that we, as Lucy said, we give people the trust and the autonomy, and hopefully they have the mastery. If not, we help to build that mastery, and then we let them do their thing. And so so that's what we try to do, and you can't do that unless you know what's needed inside that person.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna suggest that that's our first action item. There is, do I understand? And of course, it evolves too, doesn't it? I'm sitting here challenging myself with new team members at Ferris Global. Have I identified their individual motivations and developing that ability for them to function autonomously and provide that power? Lucy, a follow-up question on that. Again, working with leaders around the world, oftentimes there's this sense of, and I'm not going to suggest that anybody's ever said this, but it's this feeling of empowering means I'm going to actually give up some of my power. And I've worked hard, come on, 25, 30 years in my career, I've earned this power. You tell me I've got to give up this power? How would you coach me? If that's what I'm thinking.
Right. Well, I think you just hit it right on, Craig. The most important thing when you recognize is that you are wanting someone else's ideas to come to life, right? Like, it's not about taking away power for yourself, but recognizing that you're allowing someone to be their best. And I believe in the power of co-creation, and I believe in, other people's ideas, taking the lead. And so I find myself even more productive and motivated as a leader when I see someone else's ideas being brought to light. And it's absolutely rewarding as a leader to see people take their own ideas and move it forward.
I mean, we could almost say, couldn't we? I mean, I don't mean this to be a leading question, I apologize, but we could almost say that by empowering others, our influence in the organization actually is enhanced. We're becoming more.
Absolutely. And I think actually one thing that that Angie hit on is so critical, and we talked about that relationship piece, is it is absolutely founded on trust. 100%, the core component of this is trusting in someone else. And that's a critical element.
Yeah, so let's follow up with that one then. If I'm listening now, I'm in the huddle, and I work for someone with whom I'd like to be more empowered by. I'd like to be more empowered by them. What tips might we provide someone to earn more trust, to earn greater empowerment from someone that they're working for? What do you think?
I'm going to jump in because I know that I actually have some of my team is on this call from the State Department of Higher Education, and hopefully they'd be able to say it too. But I think that when you deliver, when you execute and you deliver, that helps to build trust. And when you have that trust, then you're willing to accept, feedback and ideas. And so I think, when you perform to that highest level, that helps to engender trust and autonomy and empowerment.
Right. And I think another component as a leader is a significant part of my role is recognizing and not putting people in a position to where they can't deliver. So, don't give someone too much responsibility before they're ready. Like, as I mature as a leader, I have to understand the organization and what they're equipped to do, because that's not setting anyone up for success, the individual, the organization. And so we really want to make sure that we give you those opportunities that are right-sized and you deliver. And that is just a mutually growing trust relationship.
Yeah, that's key. And Sherilyn will be coming to you in a moment to see if we've got some questions coming in either privately or publicly to the chat space. But I want to follow up first, Lucy. There, do you? Of course, it's going to be dependent on it'll be situational.
Right.
But how do you identify if we're giving them the right amount of, stretch assignment, the right amount of empowerment? Do we actually, as leaders, talk about that? Do we say, is this something you feel like you're going to be able to meet the objectives for? And how would you go about that? What does it look like?
Well, I think, first of all, when I'm having conversations with individuals, I try to understand what they're looking for in their career, or what they're looking to attain out of their role. And that's the foundation of helping define those stretching opportunities. And then you also make sure that you give them the supporting resources so that they can deliver, right? I think we talk so much about the relationship component, the communication component is critical. I also develop the relationship so that they can ask questions and be able to share if they feel that they're, taking on too much, because that's absolutely what we don't want someone to do.
That makes sense. Angie, do you have a follow-up to that?
No, I think that really hits it on the head. We think about that responsibility and then autonomy and being able to respond, so to speak. You have to be skilled. You have to have the skill set. You have to be trained before you can take that responsibility. So,
right.
Yeah.
Another element that's coming out in this is communication. So we're building on the foundation of trust, and a critical component is communication. And that communication goes both ways, right? With the leader and the individual.
To that point, I want to challenge our collaborative leaders. I truly embrace what I think is a shared, call it belief or worldview. As collaborative leaders, it's our job to be proactive in speaking to that. And so if I do work for someone, it's my responsibility to actually approach them and talk about what levels of empowerment are important to me, and how do I earn greater trust to enable that to occur, that level of empowerment to occur. I think that's really critical, as opposed to, of course, complaining about it or sitting back. Sherilyn, I want to come to you. Do we have any questions from our Huddle participants? Otherwise, I've got another question for Lucy.
Yeah, I do have one that was sent privately. The question is, have you had to onboard virtually, and what does empowering new team members look like?
Yes, I think probably the entire world has had some degree of virtual onboarding. And it actually caused us to completely rethink our onboarding process. And so one of the first and foremost things that we do is make sure that we have individual one-on-one connects with people that they're going to be working with closely. So rather than just having it with your leader, you proactively set up those conversations with multiple people so that you can feel like a family. We do the welcoming, I call it happy hour. You can choose to have adult beverages or not, but we do make sure we instill a lot of fun in the conversation. Absolutely.
I'll never forget working with a leader in Mexico. This is several years ago. First name was Felix. And Felix had a profound impact on my leadership. We were talking about, and this was related to onboarding, you triggered it, Lucy, the topic of accountability came up.
Right.
And Felix, a quiet gentleman, raised his hand and said these words. He said, if you want to build accountability in others, build relationships, because people don't let people down with whom they have a relationship. And so I love that in your onboarding there, even in a virtual world, you're emphasizing the human component. The
Absolutely.
component.
Absolutely. The personal component is the basis of it, for sure.
It really is. Thank you. Angie, thoughts on that?
Yeah, and if most of the folks on the call, we've up to almost 100 folks, if you've been through some of our programs, when we talk about guidelines, boundaries, and expectations and that path, I think that's really critical that we are clear about what those are. What are the guidelines, boundaries, expectations, especially expectations, because you can't just, right now, we're mostly working from home. And so you can't just walk down the hall and stop into somebody's office and say, hey, how are you doing? And it's much harder to make those informal connections. And so we have to either build those in or be really, really clear about those as we onboard someone remotely. Right. We've had to do that for at least 3 or 4 people.
Right. And in fact, over the past month or two, we've had probably 5 to 7 employees coming in to Mary Kay R&D that have not even been to Texas. I mean, they're relocating from out of state, and they're making critical life decisions on changing careers. And so recognizing the impact and the stress and the anxiety only means that the way you connect, the way you collaborate, and the way you onboard is so critical in someone's startup journey and in their life personally.
Yeah.
Lucy, I want to come back to you on that. You're talking about Mary Kay, of course. I so fondly remember, I think I was 9 years old, growing up on the farm in Minnesota, and my neighbor, the closest neighbor, a quarter mile away, she was with Mary Kay. And I'll never forget her and my mom sitting at the table. I have fond memories of that. And of course, at Mary Kay, this idea of empowering women specifically, I just think it's such an important point. Would you just share a little bit there around what empowerment means at Mary Kay?
Right. So as Craig said, in Mary Kay, we have a rich history in over 5 decades of our whole mission being on empowerment, enriching women's lives around the world and their families. And so I would consider Mary Kay a trailblazer, if you will, back in the 60s, setting up an opportunity to empower women and families. And it resonates and holds true in our culture each and every day. And what's been interesting is, you asked me this question earlier, Craig, you know, we had to disrupt ourselves, if you will, during this time. You know, we are built on empowerment and it's the core of what we are, but, you know, I don't think any company or we expected 95% of our workforce to be working from home. So we had to look inward across every part of our organization, say, how do we stay engaged? How do we support empowerment? And how do we help everyone be their best in their work each and every day? And we had to, like I said, disrupt ourselves across the board to successfully do that.
I think that's really key. And my role as a facilitator here is just to keep offering ideas, action items for our participants. That might be an action item for us. If we haven't as a team asked each other, what does empowerment look like today?
Right.
I think that question right there, just to facilitate. I mean, the truth of the matter is we're seeing a lot of companies where when the crisis hit, 5-6 months ago, everybody knows 101, crisis management 101, over communicate. We're seeing some organizations suffer from over communications continuing. You know, they got 8, 9, 10 Zoom meetings, and so I think your point here that you're guiding us to, Lucy, is really key. What does empowerment look like today, right now?
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Sherilyn, do we have an additional question?
Yeah, I have 2. The first one's private, and then I want to go to James Thompson to ask his question. The private question is, how do you build trust with supporting a fail-fast innovation philosophy?
Right. Hi, Jim. How are you?
That'll actually,
that
I think
one is
that's the
actually
second.
private,
That'll be
and
the
then we'll
second
go to-
question. The first one.
Sorry,
no
my
worries.
apologies.
That's okay.
So I think, you know, repeat the question. Was it about supporting innovation?
Yeah, how do you build trust while supporting a fail-fast innovation philosophy?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's being clear on my expectation or philosophy on failing fast is a critical part of innovation. Like, people know that failing fast is expected, it's supported. You know, repeatable mistakes and predictable mistakes are not. That's very different than failing fast and early. And in an innovation culture, you absolutely have to do that. I trust in my individuals, I trust in my scientists, and with the open dialogue, we just build from there.
Yeah.
I work for the government. We don't fail fast.
We try to support it as much as we can, Angie.
I'm really just teasing. We also do as well. We try to innovate as quickly as we can. And, you know, we have a large constituency, right? The entire state of Colorado for us and all of the higher ed institutions, nearly 500,000 students. And so we it's hard for, when we fail, then the whole public knows it.
Absolutely.
And so we want to take lots of precautions before we make it public, but we do internally. We are continuing to churn that wheel and see what else can we do more, better, faster, quicker. Yeah.
So Angie, let me come back to you on that, and then we'll hear from James. I think it was James that had a question. So if I'm in that environment, and because the stakes are so high, I'm going to feel like you're micromanaging me. I'm going to feel like you're checking on my work. I thought this was a culture of empowerment, but now you're having to check a third time. Help me understand what empowerment looks like in that sort of environment. And Lucy, if you have additional thoughts on that as well, we'll come to you.
Well, we have a lot of divisions, and those divisions have constituencies. So, for instance, if we talk about data and research, I know my senior director of research is on the call, and so he has a constituency, a data research group, and so he will innovate and then bring it to that smaller group, and then they will bring it to their campuses, and then they'll come back, and so it's a process. So I don't have to oversee the entire process. I just work with Michael, who's on the call, and then he gets to work with his constituencies with an autonomous direction. So it's not me micromanaging him; he's managing the process.
You've just added another important question for us. Not only can I, as a leader, ask what does empowerment look like for us right now, we can also say what is our process. Is our processes empowering us right now? And those are two very important and different questions. Lucy, your additional thoughts?
Yeah, so I agree. Micromanagement is the opposite of empowerment, right? Like there's a difference between needing to stay connected and informed versus micromanagement. And so I think that's an important component and as leaders grow and as they get into higher levels in the organization, you have to get more and more comfortable with not being as involved in the details. And so that's a critical element you've got to learn as you mature, so that you're not falling into behaviors that can imply micromanagement to individuals.
Yeah, that's really key. That's really key. All right, I've got some thoughts there, but let's keep rolling. Was it, Sherilyn, was it James that had a question for us?
Yeah, James Thompson, if you want to take yourself off of mute and ask your question.
Sure, it says I'm off mute, is that correct?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, Lucy and Angie, it's nice to see both of you. I've been at P&G for 30 years. I've trained with Angie and I've worked with Lucy. And rumor has it that Angie has degrees from every single one of those schools listed behind her. And my question is, and for both of you, Lucy now has experience with two big successful companies, P&G and Mary Kay. They're fundamentally different kinds of companies, I think, in many ways. And both care a lot about their employees. And I just wonder from both of your perspectives, because Angie, you've worked with both as well, I'm sure, but do you see significant differences in how empowerment is handled at these two successful organizations?
Right, that's a great question, Jim, and hello, nice to see you virtually. I think at its core, it's the same principles. I mean, as you said, both companies care and very much invest in their people and believe people as their assets. I just think how it's brought to life looks a little bit different. Procter is a very large company that has what I call micro cultures built in it. Each business unit runs a little bit differently. And so how each group empowers their employees might look a little bit different. And I think at Mary Kay, there is very much a commonality in the way in which it's brought to life and very present in the culture and how it's expected of leaders to empower employees.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that and say, I think all of us, when we make the next choice about where we might move to another company, we look first around their values and their culture, their leadership, and really around performance. Is it going to stretch me? Is it going to really tap into my skill set and what I really care about? And so I think there's some similarities in that regard in terms of values, culture, performance, leadership, and I think that's what makes the difference.
Great, thank you very much.
Good
Thanks
to
for the
see
question,
you,
James. I've got a question for Lucy and then Angie as well, and then we'll go back to our network. I want you to coach me. I'm growing in my leadership, more and more responsibilities. I'm getting higher up in that hierarchical structure, if you will. That means I have access to more information. And
Right.
As most of us know, when I get more and more information, I can begin to suffer from intellectual supremacy. I think that just because I have information that I'm somehow smarter. And those are two different things. Coach me on not succumbing to this illusion that just because I have a lot of information doesn't mean that I can make better decisions than people who might be
Right.
closer to let's just say the action.
Right. Well, I think information is useless if it's not reduced to practice in the right way and in the most strategic way. And what's the best way to do that? Surround yourself with people that are brighter than you and can excel and bring out the best in those ideas. So I kind of am not a believer at all in the philosophy of knowledge is power. I'm not. Knowledge is the kindling at which the people around you that bring it into fire.
All right, we're going to be having our insights in an instant at the end of our discussion. That's got a high ranking in my mind. Thank you, Lucy. Angie, your thoughts on this?
Yes, first, I'm really glad it's being recorded because that's going to be the new quote that I'm going to use. Wow, information is useless. If not, I can't get the rest of it, but it's being recorded. So I couldn't write it down fast enough, but I'm going to be using that one. That's fantastic. Yeah, I think the same way, you know, when we think about, again, when we move up in those levels and gradation, there's actually more. There's so much more that we don't know than what we do know. So for me, you know, yeah, I have to trust in my senior leadership and their competence and how they then lead their teams. And so it's important for me to instill in my senior leaders the same kind of values and culture and beliefs that I have so that gets permeated throughout the organization. But I cannot know as much as everybody else knows, right? None of us is as smart as all of us. And so bringing that together, I think really helps me be a better leader and helps to empower them.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you,
I think
Angie.
you do get information that's a little bit more confidential and you have to use discretion, but that's not in the spirit of holding back and feeling like you're at a different level than someone else. I mean, that's different when you're giving confidential information. That's not empowerment.
Yeah. I think some of my most embarrassing moments as a leader are suffering from intellectual supremacy, thinking that somehow I know something more and the way it held our organization back. And so this discussion is really, really valuable for me anyway. Cheryl Lynn, additional questions from our network?
Yeah, we have another one that I'm going to read. The question is, what do you do when your manager is a micromanager and is destroying empowerment in your organization? You've given them feedback and it doesn't help.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Like if it's someone that's reporting to me that's doing that, I absolutely am going to hold them accountable. And one of, you know, if you're a manager in my organization, one of your biggest deliverables is growing your organization, getting the best out of your team. Mm-hmm. So if you're micromanaging and you're going backwards in empowerment, then I'm not doing my job holding you accountable, mm-hmm. right?
I think that the question was the manager above. So if I reported to somebody and they were micromanaging me.
Right. So I think every company has their own process, but you can always seek a resource in HR. But I think first and foremost, you communicate with have you had the conversation? Have you used the tools you've been equipped with to make sure it's a clear conversation? And then you have the opportunity to, speak to another leader in the group to seek perspective on how best to handle.
And I would also say, to me, that's really an indicator of perhaps a lack of trust or a lack of performance. And sometimes that lack of performance is around expectations. Once again, it's like if the expectations are not clear, then that person who feels like they're being micromanaged, maybe it's because they don't really know what the expectation is. And that's where Lucy said the communication is so critical. So trust, communication, expectations, all of those are really critical. And by the way, there's a whole lot of other critical pieces too. So as you move up in leadership, it does become a little more difficult because I think about Ed Sullivan. Some of you are old enough to remember him. He was a late night talk show host back in the day. And he used to always have a family come on and they would spin plates on the top of poles and they would try not to let them fall and break. And sometimes I feel like that's what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that plates are spinning, right? And everyone knows their expectations and we trust each other. That's, I think, is really important.
I think you hit on something really important, is clarifying expectations, because a lot of times it's missed expectations. And so it's really important to have the dialogue on defining the guardrails, being clear on where's the trigger limit, like what's the point to elevate an issue, what's within your decision-making scope and sphere of autonomy. And I think those are sometimes the conversations that are not happening, or you walk away on different
That's right.
playing fields of what you think you're supposed to be doing.
Yep.
Excellent. This is, I must, we're going to go to the trifecta here, all three of us responding. This is such a profoundly important question because it happens, and it's unfortunate when it does. And this person who submitted the question, I want to thank them because it can be real and it can be suffocating. And I just want to underscore what we just heard from both Lucy and Angie in this, that if we succumb and put our hands up and begin to disengage, we are at risk of providing the evidence on why we shouldn't be empowered. And this is incredibly difficult because this is the essence of being human, isn't it? Knowing that in any given situation, we ultimately have control to how we respond to the circumstances. And I'm on a lifelong journey and trying to figure out how to master that. But I just want to underscore the importance of what Lucy and Angie shared, that we cannot move to a point where we provide evidence on why we shouldn't be empowered.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to acknowledge that person's question. Cheryl Lynn, our network's on a fire this morning, this afternoon, depending on where they're in the world. Additional questions or thoughts? Otherwise, I've got another one for Lucy.
Yeah, Barack, you had submitted a question regarding process. Do you want to ask Lucy and Angie and Craig that question? And take yourself off of mute.
Sure, thank you. So my question is related to the process of empowerment. What criteria do you watch before you trigger the empowerment?
So I'm thinking of a couple of thoughts that Angie and Craig and I have said. For me, it's not a protocol that you follow, right? It's not like I'm looking for indicator A, B, and C. One, I have a good understanding of the individual's motivations. Two, they've delivered. Three, I know what they're looking for in their career. And four, I have a business goal that I need to get to, and they're qualified to do it. And if you put all that together and you're in that dialogue, you can naturally find the right place. So I don't formalize it so much in a process. And those elements are really important for me as I'm thinking through it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I hope this doesn't sound like I'm not concerned about the individual, because I really am. But I will tell you that what I have learned in my 18, 19 months at running the department is performance really matters to me. And if I ask for something and it gets delivered quickly, I'm coming back to that person. And so the level of performance and really kind of the speed and the quality of that performance really helps me with trusting that that person will be able to deliver on the next thing that I need. Because like Lucy said, we have lots of deliverables and sometimes they come up quickly. And so to empower somebody, I like to see what is their past performance, because it's the best predictor of future performance, right? And so so that really helps me. And then of course, if I have a good relationship, with that person, there's a lot of trust and there's clear communication, so it shortens the process. So those are things I look for. Thanks, Barack.
Yeah, an important question. And I believe in a world that's demanding, we all become more agile. I think then it's probably logical in our process, we want to, of course, increase the frequency with which, not just a milestone checkpoint, but actually I think it's important that we're aligning around a shared reality. Right. What's our shared reality? Those around both the data that we're getting back and the problems we must solve, and of course the decisions we must make. And so in an agile world, those moments of shared reality logically want to increase with frequency. Angie?
Yeah, and I will say this as well, that when the deliverable is not, there's not that level of expediency, then I think it's really important to bring others in and give others a chance to demonstrate their level of performance and that they can deliver. And so unfortunately, we work on a world where everything needs to be delivered right now, but the more that we can expand that, then we build our team, right? Rather than just relying on one individual or a few individuals.
I think one of the things it's had us do is it gave us the opportunity in this virtual world to really look at the non-value add work. So it goes back to, like you said, performance and expediency, but we really had the ability to take a look at everything we're doing each and every day and say, that's not the most important thing right now. What it's done is it's caused everyone to be more motivated. We're connecting more frequently, Craig, but it's less time. Like we just don't spend time on meetings when we're done. We don't have a meeting if we don't need it. Like how, that has been such a benefit for me personally and for our organization is, you're just really getting onto the most important stuff and everyone's more productive for it.
I did see a study on that since the pandemic and the rapid change, of course, that's occurring in multiple areas of business, but that's actually increasing. That what you just shared is occurring at many organizations, that people are getting to the points of focus much quicker and moving on to the next that's critical.
Yeah. There's a risk though, Craig, I will tell you that I think is important. And it's something I've had to remind myself. It's very easy for the days and nights to run together, right? And so people have a tendency to not ever leave their home location. And so I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of the homeward bound framework. I mean, I might still be in my home, but I have to mentally make sure I'm looking at my homeward bound framework and disconnecting and putting the focus on my family in the right time. Because remember, my definition of success for me personally is harmony. And so I really want to make sure I do that as a leader. And I have to encourage that. I mean, I've had people who've hesitated taking vacation because they're at home. No, like you have got to really make sure you're in touch with your team and they're taking the mental time off that they need during this virtual world.
I would say we are negligent as collaborative leaders if we are not including what you just shared, Lucy, in our course of leadership, and that is empowering others, being very clear and actually taking the responsibility to help them set the guidelines, the boundaries, shared expectations around what it looks like to take care of oneself and our families and so forth. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I just really think that, this is, we say it's unprecedented and it truly is. So there's nothing for us to base it on. But one of the things that I think is really important is the culture that we have created. And so I don't want to jeopardize our culture in favor, if you will, of productivity. And so for me, it's really important that we as leaders are generous, we're flexible, and if a person, like right now for us, we have some of our K-12 schools are starting up face-to-face, and so we have some of my coworkers who have children, and so if they have to take an hour to go pick up their kid from school, or they have to do some work, it's like we have to be more generous about that 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever it is. We have to be real generous if we're going to preserve the culture. And we know that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, dinner. And so, so that's really important to me.
And I think that actually, Angie, is one of the ways that we've disrupted ourselves at Mary Kay is the flexibility that everyone's recognized has to happen in a world like that has in turn allowed people who are working from home the flexibility they've needed, and that's positively influenced their engagement and their empowerment, right? And I think that we wouldn't have inherently defaulted to that much flexibility had we not been put in that situation. And now that we're looking at people on their deliverables, not so much on their 8 to 5, which is a very antiquated approach anyway. Mm-hmm. People are more engaged, empowered, and combining that with eliminating non-value add work, like, wow, everybody's running on all 4 cylinders. It's great.
That's great.
I want to follow up on that, but first, Cheryl Lynn, do we have an additional question from the network?
Yeah, I have one last question. This was also sent privately. The question is, how do you communicate the benefits of an empowered culture versus the traditional command and control culture to your organizational leaders?
Right. Well,
to the leaders. Okay,
to the leaders?
Yeah. So how do you communicate the benefits to your leaders?
Well, it's well understood that empowerment is really connected to a company's bottom line. It's important for retention and retaining top talent. It's also directly connected with engagement, and engagement correlates to productivity. And it's very important for your brand. I mean, we're all working for companies, whether it's our individual privately owned company or public. And so it's really important for brand. So it's so connected to the business that it would baffle me if a leader, you know, I would want to have that dialogue with them because they're impacting the bottom line if they're not empowering their team.
I would add two things, but Angie, I want to hear from you first, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of talent development, right? When we build and develop our teams, I think this is critical to that arena. So in addition to retention, so who you can bring in is based on what your company and your department is known for out there in the world. And so, so bringing in people, it will depend on brand and on that culture that people know, and then keeping them, that retention is critical, and then also developing them. So I think it's a critical.
Absolutely.
Consistent with those comments, I believe there's an opportunity within organizations to consistently connect empowerment to speed, of course, or agility. Again, those being two different things, of course, but organizations seeking how do we get their product to market faster? How do we adapt to market changes or employee needs faster? And so I believe there's opportunity to facilitate that discussion around what's the connection between our levels of empowerment and speed or agility. The other piece I think is really critical, I'm really grateful for this question because I believe we could bring this into our sessions more, is how do we self-assess? How do we know when we are empowering our workforce? And getting really clear around what that looks like so that we can, of course, create more accountability to it.
Right. So I think first and foremost, getting feedback, right? I mean, as a leader, it's so important for me to get perspective. I go to my direct reports and sense in the organization and ask them, like, give me examples where I've maybe not made you feel empowered, right? Like, it's not tell me what I'm doing right. Tell me examples where I've made you feel not empowered so that I can learn from them. And sensing is such an important part of being a leader. That's where the ego, you got to let it go.
Yeah, Lucy, you're an emotionally intelligent leader. We know this. And so I'm thinking about how many, that question right there might be difficult for some of us. And I love it, though. That calls us to a higher level because it moves us from binary, I'm empowering others or I'm not, and just simply saying it's a process of continuous improvement. I want to be more empowering as a leader.
Right.
And so let's have that honest discussion. Thank you. Angie, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've got a quick takeaway for myself because in state government, we do like a culture survey every other year. And so I don't have time to wait for 2 years to find out how my team is feeling around that. And so I just wrote down right here that we need to do kind of a mid-season and you know, provide opportunities for that kind of feedback. But I think it's time for us to probably do another culture survey. We did exceptionally well in the last one, so yay for my team. And so rather than waiting for that to happen, really seeking out that feedback, I think. So thanks for that, Lucy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, excellent. Sherilyn, we've got time for one more quick question. I apologize. I think you said that was the last, but I want to check in one more time to respect our network. Is there any additional question or comment from the network?
We do not have any additional comments or questions.
Okay. Lucy, I've got one final question for you then, and then we'll go to our insights in an instant. When it comes to then the getting a shared reality around what success looks like, I mean, beyond the classic question, what does success look like? Do you have any other tips for us? Anything else as it relates to creating a shared reality as, let's say, we're just about ready to press go on an action plan? Any additional tips for us?
Yeah, I think once again, it goes back to the premise of understanding, you know, whatever the company or business you're working for, what their ultimate mission is, right? You've got to understand your enterprise's mission. And then two, you've got to understand from the individuals in the organization what success is for them because they're all in different roles. And I think that, you know, bringing those two together is the hard part about being, you know, a leader, but it's the most important element in defining your shared reality. What you'll often find is that there are perceived barriers or obstacles that exist in getting there. And as long as you can help break those down and define them, then your organization is going to be super successful.
Yeah, well put, well put. And I appreciate you said it's not easy to do, right? But it's necessary. and we can develop the habit, the discipline of doing this even more consistently. Excellent. We're going to be coming back to our insights in an instant. Of course, we ask everybody to participate in that as we wrap things up. First, exciting news. Some 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, our classic transformative process, our flagship program, Pathways to Leadership, people would tell us you could never do it virtually. Well, enter the pandemic, and guess what happens? While we've been doing virtual work for a couple of years now, really excited about the fact that we're now engaging with our clients in the transformative virtual Pathways to Leadership process. All the tools that you know and love are a part of that. The improved sustainability process, we're seeing even greater traction in long-term outcomes. The robust scientific measurement, we now have the assessment for leadership and organizational alignment that comes with all of our work. Very excited about that. And then, of course, as always, this is a whole person process, so our families don't get our leftovers. Just so excited to share that with the network because several folks I know have experienced the in-person Pathways to Leadership process. Different parts of that, you can take it in the small part or the entire part as the whole, if you will, is now available. We're really excited about bringing that to market. A huge tip of the hat to our team at Veris Global. Next, resources, of course. As you know, at Veris Global, several books, our Connected Focus video cast, we're available on LinkedIn, and of course, the leadership blog. But I also want to point out the mission of Mary Kay and the tremendous resource they are for women of our world, and of course, this movement of empowerment. Lucy, thank you for bringing more light to that. It's been very insightful for me. Our next huddle, next Collaborative Leaders Huddle is November 3rd, 8 a.m. Rocky Mountain time. I so apologize that we're not able to do these more frequently. We get a lot of requests for them. And the truth of the matter is we're all out there doing great things. And so it's tough to get on the calendars. Very grateful for the energy behind this. That'll be our next huddle. If you have folks in mind that might be ideal guests, difficult to follow Lucy, I know, but if you have someone in mind, please share that name with us, and we'll see what we can do in getting them in our next Collaborative Leaders Huddle. With that, our insights in an instant. Angie, would you please go first? What's your biggest takeaway? And by the way, as Angie shares these, for those of you in the network, if you'd like to answer that, what's your most profound, important insight, a reminder of something important, a new idea, an action item? If you'd enter that in the chat space. Angie, let's hear from you.
Well, I have a few of them, but I'm going to go with just the one. But the big question was, how do we empower employees in this new normal of business? And I think one of the things that was said around empowerment is connected to agility, to speed, to performance. And I think sometimes we think of empowerment only as development, but it really is around agility. It's around how can we really move the company forward even faster. So that's
Excellent.
my insight in an instant.
Insight in an instant. Mine is started at the very beginning, and Lucy just hammered this home for me. Is it's personal, and leadership is executing strategies is a social process. It's human beings connecting with human beings, and so that was profoundly important for me, Lucy. This idea of making it personal, individually. That's what empowerment looks like. I can get better there. Thank you, Lucy. How about you?
I think for me, it's don't let yourself as the leader be the one getting in the way from empowering your organization. As we talked about, information is useless unless you can reduce it to practice. And by doing that with the bright minds around you is the best way. So don't get in the way and pave the way for your team.
Excellent. Dr. Lucy Galdea, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Angie Piccioni, thank you. You're both incredibly busy. And to be able to share this time with you and on behalf of our entire network, thank you for empowering not just those with whom you work, but of course, people around the world. It's an honor being teamed with you in this endeavor. Thank you to our network. As a reminder, leadership matters, but only teams deliver. Thank you for empowering. We'll see you in our next Leadership Collaborative Leaders Huddle, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.